Embezzling from Jobker. I'll start off by saying this happened to my sister, and the actions taken were hers. My sister has always gotten along very well with teachers and has a habit of forming actual relationships with them, to the point that she still talks to her fifth-grade English teacher, along with many others decades later. This happened about 15 years ago. My sister was a student at Job Corps, a government-run, live-on-campus vocational training program, studying hotel and motel management. She got on extremely well with her hotel management teacher, better than pretty much every teacher she'd had up to that point. One day, the teacher goes to the center's dean's office and walks in on a paper shredding session. It turned out there was some pretty major embezzling happening at the center. As in, more than 60% of the funds for the center were being stolen. The teacher was appalled, and despite some rather lucrative offers made, refused to join in on these acts. Less than a week later, the teacher was fired for trumped-up reasons. This was especially bad given the teacher was only 2 years away from retiring, and being fired lost her retirement package. Needless to say, my sister was pissed. Knowing how these things typically work, and that almost any report she tried to make would just be swept under the rug. If it was taken seriously at all, she came up with a plan and took things nuclear. Over the next month or two, my sister managed to gather some basic evidence of the embezzling. Nothing concrete, but enough to warrant considerable investigation by the authorities. She took the little evidence she was able to gather, along with the story of what happened to her teacher, and sent the info in an email to the Job Corps regional director. Now, like I said, she knew that her email would likely be ignored, or the event slipped under the rug. So she got smart. The email was CC'd to every single major person in the Job Corps chain of command, all the way up to the national director, as well as to anyone even tangentially related to the Job Corps in the upper echelons of the Department of Labor. And it worked. Every member of Congress, as well as the U.S. President's office. Remember, this was a government-run program. All in all, the email was sent to over 2,000 people. Basically, she not only sent the report, but sent it in such a way that everyone who got it could also see everyone else who got it. And she sent it to way more people than would be needed to ensure the issue couldn't be swept under the rug. 2 weeks later, after the investigation finished, never seen the government work so fast on anything that wasn't collecting owed taxes. Only 5 or 6 staff members out of 20-ish that worked in the center still had their jobs. And at least 5 of the ones fired, including the dean, were facing major criminal charges, with the rest facing minor charges. I'm not sure of the exact figure on how much was stolen, but it was well into the 7 digits. The embezzling has been happening for years. The teacher got a very nice severance package post-investigation. If I recall correctly, it was 3 years of her pay, her full retirement package, and signing an NDA, though she didn't get her job back. And my sister was given her completion certificate, despite not having finished the requirements of the course. They wanted her gone, but couldn't kick her out. I know what to do. Fine, don't pay for your WEBISTE, I got a backdoor. Hey all, so I'm a freelance web developer. Had a guy contact me saying there was a small project he needed help with, stating it should take minutes and wanted to pay $50. He also states that he needs it done by the end of the day, since he's apparently in a tight spot with his employer, so he needs it done fast. Also, fair enough. I'm not going to turn it down just because it's a tight deadline. I get in and find out his previous developer was very sloppy, and the code was nearly impossible to read. His site is in Squarespace, and a lot of second-rate developers work there. Which is fair, because it's pretty easy. I can tell the client this code is horrible, and I need to reformat. Then, it turns out the new links that he wanted in there completely broke everything. I told him that it would likely take about 6 hours to get all this sorted out, and he said that was fine and would compensate me accordingly by my hourly rate of $80 an hour. So I finish everything up, tell him the total of $640, and he agrees. Says he can pay me the next day. This, I'll pay you the next day, BS, goes on for about 2 weeks. And I try to call him again on the most recent day that he said he'd pay me. Turns out he's now blocked my number. A couple days go by of trying to contact him while still getting nothing. I went to log into the site to cut my losses and delete my work. Turns out he's changed the password. At this point, it's clear to me this was planned. So I'm pissed. I email him stating that if I don't hear anything within 48 hours, I'll be serving him court papers and demand of payment to his address that I had to find through an ancestry site, and subsequently call his apartment complex to confirm before I serve some poor sap with random court papers. He doesn't email for 24 hours, and this morning I find out that I'm still logged into the site through the Squarespace app. Clearly, this is a huge vulnerability in Squarespace, since he had changed his password and I was still in on the app. I'll likely report this to them. This is when my revenge comes into play. I created a new email that was his address at protonmail.com, which I then used to sign up for a new Squarespace account. Invite myself as a contributor so I can access on desktop as well, and set his live site as password protected. He sees this and is repeatedly emailing me and texting me, saying he can pay me $250. But the $750, now with late fees, is just insane and way too much. Now, apparently, he can pay me on Monday, which I've heard plenty of already. This pissed me off even more, so I stated I would continue adding late fees until he pays up, and that his site will continue to be mine. Now, his site is indeed live again, but every page auto-plays terrible SoundCloud rappers, and all the links he had me place now take the user to cool math games. I considered the hub, but perhaps that's a bit much. I've never done this to other clients, but this dude is a 43-year-old piece of garbage. I should also state that I pride myself in my work and generally run on a very professional level. However, I won't accept no payment and being dicked around for weeks. Breaks his own legs in order to destroy someone's career. In my teens, I had to have numerous operations. Therefore, I always ended up at one particular hospital that specialized in my condition. Now, the hospital was high quality, with staff that was very caring and looked out for the patients they had. They gave you essentially the 5-star treatment. After all, they were charging our insurance an incredible amount of money, so that probably had something to do with it. But one particular operation I had, it all went to heck. It wasn't like this type of procedure wasn't something that I hadn't done in the past. It was about the third time I needed to have it done. No pressure whatsoever. Essentially, it entailed breaking both of your legs and placing rods in them to put them back into their proper place so they would end up growing correctly. They would be in for a few months to heal, and then they were taken out. During that time, I would have to turn small little handles to reposition my bones according to a pre-printed out schedule given to me by my doctor. It hurt like crazy, but it was worth it in the end. Despite how often I'd done it, it was still extremely painful, especially for the first few weeks after the procedure was done. Any vibrations would send shockwaves of pain throughout your entire body, regardless of how doped up you were on painkillers. So the doctors took extra care to ensure that any trip back home was as smooth as possible. Literally, they all understood that without a jet back to your home city, for anyone more than 40 minutes away from the hospital, it was medically required that you travel back home in a medjet. Imagine every single bump you experienced when driving for any period of time. Now imagine being sent into shock waves of 10 out of 10 pain. Every single time you went over that bump, you get the idea. Now, most hospitals offer individuals a liaison to individuals within the hospital to deal with their insurance. Just have that individual talk to the doctor, and right away they would work out what the doctor wanted with the company. No hassle. We didn't take up that offer because we understood how everything worked, and it was never an issue. But the hospital always offered us one anyway. And yes, these liaisons were not employees of the insurance company, but of the hospital. They were designed to look after the best interests of the patients and justify it to the insurance company. Then, our designated liaison decided that our request to not have one was unacceptable, and thus, he would intentionally intervene at every change he could. He even went as far as to deny our nurse request for extra pillows, because the hospital only allows X number of pillows per person, despite the nurse literally stating it was fine. But no, since he was at a higher level, he apparently had the final say. When it was nearing our time to leave the hospital, like always, the doctor wanted to bill the insurance for the medical jet, because it was medically required. Same old, same old. However, our moron liaison disagreed with the doctor's assessment that it was medically required, justifying his opinion based upon our insurance company's definition of medically required. Naturally, the doctor flipped his lid and verbally curb-stomped the idiot. The liaison said, listen, simply avoiding pain isn't something that the insurance will cover. It's not medically required to avoid pain. The doctor said, are you kidding me? You realize this patient would have to drive 12 hours in a cramped ambulance, with 2 broken legs, and excruciating pain if they didn't fly. It's absolutely unheard of. You literally would have to have 2 EMTs escort them back home just in case anything happened. The cost is only marginally smaller than the freaking jets. Plus, there's a small chance the routes could become disrupted if anything happens in the car. That's the justification. The odds of any crash happening are not high enough for the company to justify it. This would hurt the company if they keep doing this. Listen, I don't know why on God's green earth you are even arguing with me. This isn't effing up to you. You're not a doctor. You have no medical training. You were given a freaking list of the insurance company's policies, and now you think you can properly diagnose what is or isn't medically required. I've done this for thousands of patients with this very company. Now get yourself back to the office, bill the effing insurance company properly, and shut the EFF up. You work for us, not for them. I was in earshot of this entire conversation. A week later, on the day of departure, we learned what happened when we went back to his office. He had called the insurance company and began going through the proper channels to get the jet approved. However, he began dropping small hints to the ref that, in his opinion, driving would also be fine. So naturally, on the day before the departure, we got a call from the insurance company denying the request. I was furious. There wasn't time to appeal the decision. There wasn't anything any of us could do. Even my doctor was stuck. Because the liaison worked for a different department, and he couldn't even fire the guy. He apologized time and time again and ensured the 12-hour ambulance ride would be as comfortable as possible, and even told the driver to keep me as medicated as possible to ensure it went well. Naturally, it did nothing, and it was the most torturous 12-hour experience of my life. I was screaming the entire 12 hours. The ambulance wasn't even outfitted with a bed. It only had some type of hammock-type thing. The 2 EMTs had to endure non-stop screaming from someone who didn't even belong in the ambulance in the first place. Everyone was furious. Everyone blamed that one man. Everyone wanted him fired, but they had no medical reason to fire him. Because according to the union's policies, he technically did what he was supposed to do. The only way for him to be let go was for him to have caused the patient some type of harm that the doctor warned about. So days after my trip, my doctor insisted that I see a medical professional in my hometown. And sure, nothing happened on the trip. This was like the third time I'd done this, so it was a pretty common request I was familiar with. And I was still fuming. This is when I hatched my plan. I knew that I was the only one with control over the rod's proper position. I knew that having the rods not properly dialed in for a few days wouldn't do any long-term harm, and it would only result in a lot of pain to dial it back in afterwards. I knew that my doctor would be furious if anything happened out of the ordinary, his reputation being on the line and such. And I knew that no medical professional had checked my rods to confirm their current setting after the trip. So I popped 3 pain pills, waited for them to kick in, and unscrewed every single rod to the lowest setting possible. Just for reference, after the procedure, they end up setting the starting point for these rods somewhere in the middle range of their settings. The worst pain of my effing life. I was wheeled into my local doctor with the adjustment notebook in hand. I kept playing dumb, saying I believed everything was going fine, but my legs just felt awful. And if it was possible, he could make sure everything was going okay. He began his inspection, and his face went white when he realized where the screws were set. He asked me what setting they had been on when I left the hospital, and I told him. Again, he didn't look happy. He told me that something must have happened on the trip, and he would need to properly adjust them back into place, and it would hurt like crazy, but it needed to be done. The screaming at that appointment was, let's just say, disruptive. I didn't even have to fake it. It was genuinely one of the most painful things I have ever experienced in my life. My doctor was furious, as he was up to date on the entire liaison situation. He excused himself after the readjustment of the rods to the back room. I assume he thought it was out of earshot. He was wrong. He phoned my doctor out of state, and he had a few choice words for him. How could you effing let this happen? Do you know how dangerous this could have been? If he hadn't gotten an appointment with me this fast, his effing bones would have permanently grown in the wrong place. And he would need another surgery to fix this effing mess. I don't know what kind of effing operation you have over there, but there is 0 chance I will ever refer anyone in my clinic to you. Do you hear me? How hard is it to control your effing insurance handlers? Fast forward to my operation to remove my rods, back in that specialist hospital out of state. The liaison was not just terminated. Oh no. The liaison got accused of intentionally trying to endanger the life of a patient, plus lying to the insurance company, plus lying about a doctor's medical assessment for his own benefit. No idea where this last accusation came from. Maybe it was lodged as an additional justification to fire him? I don't quite know all the consequences of his actions. I only could muster up a few details from my doctor. From what my doctor described, the hospital put out a notice to every hospital in the state to not hire this man. Those hospitals apparently also sent out a notice to all the hospitals in their surrounding areas to not hire this man. This ended up resulting in a domino effect that barred him from working in almost every hospital in the country. I wanted him fired. I didn't plan on getting him blacklisted. Nevertheless, I was effing giddy, especially after my doctor informed me that there was no lasting damage for the mistake he caused. Fast forward about 4 years, and I hear through the grapevine that he ended up having to change professions because of the accusations. Ended up doing some waste management job or something. No idea if it's a literal garbage man status or working at a waste management company in a desk job.